Right.
Right? Okay.
Right.
So now there's nothing you can do, right, that will show me or give me an argument for why intelligibility should conform that way to reality. Because what you'll do is you'll get locked in, right? And this is what Plato saw, right? But what Plato's basically saying is it's like, if I can put it this way, I'll try and put it in a way that's more narrative. It's like there's a perpetual promise that intelligibility will track reality, and that we find that to be inexhaustibly the case. But there's no argument we can give that will ultimately explain that, because every argument presupposes it. Does that track as...
I'm not sure why the last part of that is true, although I agree that it's true. So, and what's running around in the back of my head while you're laying that out is I think, well, in some sense, that's the problem that evolution solves in a technical sense. So, let's say a mosquito lays 1 million eggs in its lifetime. And so that's 1 million mosquitoes whose epistemology better track ontology, but almost none of them do. So they all die.
Yes.
And so that mapping, I think, because it's philosophically impossible in some sense, I think that the process of evolution is actually what solves that. And then our cognitive architecture emerges out of that evolved base. And so it's taken 3.5 billion years to produce the solutions that we have to mapping intelligibility onto.
I totally agree with you about this. I agree, so let me agree and then tell you why I think it goes deeper.
Yeah.
Okay, so just very quickly, I think relevance realization basically does that same thing that evolution does. It has it's a self-organizing system in which you would introduce variation and then selection. Your attention's doing it right now. There's a drive to open up, mind wander, vary, and then and what you're doing is constantly evolving your fittedness, your optimal gripping. So
towards some end, which is the dialogue of the conversation.
Yes.
Yeah,
yes.
And whatever that's embedded in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you're doing this.
Exactly.
Yeah, and there's a space of associations beside what you're doing.
But what I'm saying is evolution actually presupposes an ontology in which that will work.
Right.
Right. So that's the deeper point. Okay.
Right.
Okay.
So that you should have something to say about that.
But we've talked about that before. Like when we did that thing on Genesis, and you talk about how it's this idea of a psychic projection. But the idea that, let's say Jung, for example, could imagine that you could psychically project patterns and onto the world means that it presupposes that the same problem. Like that means that those patterns are presupposed in the manner in which the world exists for that to even be
right.
possible.
And the historians of science I've read who attempt to embed the development of science in a Judeo-Christian ethic by necessity, also, giving obeisance, let's say, to the influence of the Enlightenment, say that the notion that there was a logos, there's an ontological logos as well as an epistemological logos, was a precondition for the development of the scientific attitude. And I think that's true.
Yes, and I think, and that's the cornerstone of ancient epistemology. You don't ask the question, how from this, the workings of my mind, do I get to the ontology? You ask the question, well, whatever knowledge there is presupposes intelligibility, right? And then I have to ask, what must the world be like such that that intelligibility reliably exists? It's a very different orientation.
That's for sure.
Okay, but let's take it that this is at least a plausible argument. The promise that intelligibility is wedded to reality and that we can realize it through something like relevance realization, cognitively or biologically, adaptivity through evolution, right? That promise is continually made, but we can give no explanation for it because given what we've just said, every attempt to explain it presupposes it as a fundamental thing.
Okay, that seems just fine to me.
The fact that the promise is inexhaustibly kept is the good.
Is that the good that is referred to in Genesis when God uses the logos to derive habitable order out of chaos and says it is good? Is that the same idea?
I hope so. I mean, for me, that's what Plato means when he talks about how the good is even beyond being. Yeah. Because the good makes possible the intelligibility of reality.
Okay, well, that's kind of what I'm trying to also drive at in this system of propositions.
And that's what I meant, and I hope you took it as a compliment when I said I think this is a Neoplatonic argument you're making. You're doing a lot of the similar moves.
Okay.
Now, the thing I have is, right? So that's the good. And then is there a way of, and I think Jonathan will have some important things to say.
So that's like the a priori structure of being. Before there's actually beings. It's like there's a potential intelligibility even for the finite in relation to the infinite.
Exactly, because and what you can do is you can reject that fundamental goodness. And notice, I can't give you an argument to get you back into it. But if you reject that fundamental goodness, you see Descartes wrestling with this because he tries to, he gets sort of stuck inside the cogito, right? And he's trying, and
I think, therefore I am.
Right, and he realizes, I could be trapped in solipsism and skepticism. And what does he do? He says, no, there must be a God that guarantees that the intelligibility, the clear and distinct ideas, map onto reality. He realizes he needs something outside of the argument in order to guarantee that fundamental goodness that makes everything else possible. But then what he does is he creates famously a circular argument for that God. And so he tries to make an argument for it, but he ends up presupposing the very thing he's trying to prove. This is what I mean by our apprehension of it is not something that is produced inferentially. It is an apprehension of this fundamental goodness. And I can't give you an argument or an evidence for it. Now, I think ethical goodness is dependent on and reflective of, at times exemplary of, that ontological, if you'll allow me, goodness.
And don't you think that that's the reason why in so many traditions, the infinite is always referred to negatively, like the whole notion of negative theology or...
Oh, that's interesting. Say more.
Well, the idea that if you want to express that which is the source of being, you end up having it it empties itself.
Yes.
It empties itself of all characteristics, while recognizing that it is at the same time the summation of all character. It's like the good ultimately is that which everything is culminating to, and then it's a kind of giving away into something which is always more.
And you think that's related to that a priori acceptance of the existence of the relationship between intelligence and being? Well, that this thing that guarantees that is being pointed at by these processes.
I think so. I don't know, I can take you on this experiment that I've talked about. This idea that identity is kenotic, that identity always kind of empties itself into more. So you always use the example of an object, like you have a cup, and then you have at a certain level, you have different aspects of the cup. Yeah. And so in order for it to reach its good, all these elements, in order for them to reach its good, they have to give themselves into something which cannot be found at the level of